Hey guys, Brad here from Scooter Street. We've got a fun one today. Exactly as it says in the title, I've got a Piaggio Zip here, and we're going to blow it up. We're going to deliberately seize the piston, and that way we can show you what it sounds like when you seize a piston, because it's a very characteristic sound. And if you've not heard it before, it'd be a little bit confusing. So we're going to seize the piston, and then we're going to fix it. We're going to show you how to do a piston kit in a Piaggio Zip. And look, even if you don't have a Zip, if you have a seized piston in a two-stroke scooter, most two-stroke pistons are pretty much the same. And the principles we're going to show you in this video are going to apply to basically any 50cc two-stroke scooter. So I'm going to open the shop up. I've got the scooter behind me here. We're going to get it out. And I'm going to work out how I'm going to nip it up. I'm probably going to do a heat seizure by just taking the airbox off. Maybe putting a pod filter on there and just running it super lean. You know, you can seize a piston, you know, if your oil lines break or your oil pump fails. But the problem with doing this is you can actually cause some damage to your bearings, your crank bearings, by running the crank dry. So I'd rather really not do that. So I'm just gonna pop the airbox off, maybe put a pod filter in there just to be safe. And we're gonna seize this thing, and we're gonna have a look at the damage, pull it down, and put a new piston in there, and show you how to rebuild if you've had a seizure. Honestly, guys, rebuilding a two-stroke scooter is super simple, requires very basic mechanical tools, and it's a really good skill to learn if you have a little two-stroke scooter, because look, two-strokes aren't built, they're built for a fun time, not for a long time. They probably do, you know, somewhere between 15 and 20,000 Ks. Then you've got to do a piston change. So it's a really good skill to learn to save yourself spending a bunch of money at a shop. Here it is in all its glory. We've got a dead battery, I think, though. So I'm going to go ahead and change this battery quickly. Take two. I've got lights, that's a good sign. It hasn't run in a while, so I'll just take it for a quick buzz around the car park, make sure everything's good, and then we'll have a look at getting this thing to blow up. A little bit doughy, being old, but she definitely runs. So let's whip this airbox off and see if we can kill it. Up on the bench, if you've ever owned or worked on a Zip, the one really big complaint about these is it's so frustrating working on some parts of the engine like the airbox, because the panels are so in the way, you just can't get to these bolts. So I might even just take the whole airbox off, to be honest. It's probably going to be easier. Just got to get the bolt at the front now. But the shape of these airboxes is quite unusual. It sort of wraps around the front of the car. It makes it quite hard to get off. I had to take this little inspection panel under the seat. The carb, you had to take that off because the bolt for the hose clamp was facing up. So it was a hose clamp holding the whole thing up. Let's try this again, hey? There we go, that's a bit better. We are free and away. Pretty much, there we go. Jeez, it's warm today. Okay, so I'm going to chuck one of these on, mainly because I'm a little bit worried outside. There's sort of pebbles and stuff around, and if just one unlucky pebble happens to flick up into that carby, we're going to be up for a lot more than a piston change. So I'm going to chuck this one here on. It's our little Molossi E5. And this is the one specifically for the Delorto PHVA that's in the factory carb in these ones. I'm going to chuck this on, and then I'm going to probably just rev it on the stand outside and see if it nips up. I don't know if that will be enough, to be honest. Often they'll only nip up under load, and I really don't feel like driving it up the street and then having it nip up and have to walk 500 meters back or 2 Ks back, walk the scooter back in this heat. So hopefully it just seizes on the stand. I have a feeling it won't though, so we're going to find out, aren't we? Hot tip when you're putting a pod filter on, and even actually for an airbox, with the hose clamp, get it to roughly the size of the diameter. Obviously, it needs to be a little bit loose so it slips on, especially if this is rubber, which this one isn't. But get it to roughly the size, because man, it's so much easier when you're in the confines of the of this little area here. You only have a little bit to do up. You don't have this you know, huge big amount of slack you got to do up. A nice little angle on these angled E5s, the PHV8. It just sits in a nice spot. This is going to sound cool, and it's going to go like crap. Going to give it a couple little runs up and down the car park. Hopefully, I don't want to stop filming because I don't know when it's going to seize, but hopefully soon. Give it to these things. They're tough little scooters. All right, next plan. She just doesn't want to seize. All right, I'm going to pull the fan off the flywheel. That way there'll be no air cooling going around the cylinder. Hopefully that kills it. Came up with a simpler solution. Just tape up the air inlet here, and no air can get in to cool the fins of the cylinder, which should just overheat the cylinder and shouldn't affect the crank. Hopefully. I'm not going to upload all that footage because it'll be boring, but far out. That was hard to seize. I had the cooling fan, all the air for the cooling fan blocked off, and a pod filter on it without changing the stock jet, so it's running super lean. It has no air for the air cooling, and it still took a good 6 minutes of revving it on full throttle to kill it. I can't believe how tough this thing is. And it's got 18,000 Ks on it. It's not like it's a spring chicken. Like it's, you know, it's probably had a piston change at some point, but it's not as though it's got like 1,000 Ks on it. Like it's an old piston. Tough scooter. I'm going to let it cool down for about 20 minutes because it's going to be super duper hot. And then we're going to pull the cylinder off and have a look at the damage. This would probably be a good thing to show you as well. This is something I've experienced quite a few times. It mostly happens with stock pistons, not so much when you have a 70 kit or a performance cylinder on there. But the stock cylinders are generally really tough because they're cast iron. And what will often happen is after a heat seizure, which this one definitely had, give it a few minutes to cool down. And it'll start back up. Now, once it cools down a little bit, obviously, just depending on how bad the seizure is, it obviously hasn't completely gummed up the rings. It's probably just a heat seizure down the bottom of the piston, but we're going to find out in a sec. But, you know, this can be a little bit confusing for people. You think, oh, no, I've had a seizure. Well, the thing with a seizure is the piston only seizures just for a fraction of it, like maybe for a second. Just enough, you know, that it acts basically like brakes. You know, it just grabs onto the sides of the cylinder wall and just stops the engine. But it's not, you know, you'd have to have an enormous, usually like a mechanical failure, like if your little end bearing has exploded or, you know, something along those lines, or something has mechanically gone in and jammed the engine. That's usually the only time with a two-stroke that you'll get an actual seizure where it just stops and just won't even move at all. Generally with a heat seizure, which is what this one will be, the piston just has a moment of being too hot, it grabs onto the cylinder wall and stops it. And then it cools down, and as long as you have a little bit of compression with those rings, it hasn't completely gummed up the rings, it'll usually start. Now it'll run for maybe 2 minutes, and then it'll just keep seizing. This will keep happening if you keep riding it over and over until it just doesn't start again. So if you have a seizure, best thing to do if you're out somewhere and you're stuck, give it a couple of minutes to cool down, and you may even be able to, which I have before, be able just to limp it home, just in little 2-minute stages. Just try and keep it on low throttle, and you might just be able to limp it home. Because, yeah, like I said, these are really tough little engines, so they'll often start up again after a couple of minutes of cooling down. But yeah, it'll definitely need a piston change after it's had that first seizure event. All right, while it was cooling down, I've stripped way more than is necessary, obviously, to change the piston. But I thought, just for the purposes of showing you what to do, I thought it'd be much easier if we've got a bit more of a bare bones situation, and we can get the camera in there really nice and show you what we're doing. So it's pretty much cooled down now. I'm going to pull the shroud off, and we're going to have a look at getting this cylinder off. Good telltale sign straight away that this has probably had a piston done on it before, because these screws don't match. So I'd say it's probably had a piston done before. Yeah, there we go. That's not a factory screw. Always good to just inspect the plug burn while you're doing this. It's probably slightly rich, but it's a pretty good burn. Sometimes, if you've really done a big job of it, you might even find a little bit of piston material on here. A little bit of, almost looks like aluminium powder that's like fused itself to the end of the plug. Generally, this will probably only happen if you do a big seizure on like a race kit, which I've done a couple of times. And yeah, you pull the plug out and you know pretty quickly that you've done a good job of it. Now, if you were trying to assess whether you'd seized your piston, pulling the exhaust off would be the first thing that you would do. It's often the easiest way to tell, because you can pop the exhaust off and have a look up through the exhaust port with a torch, get under the scooter and have a look, or we use a mirror in the shop. It's often a really easy way to tell. Oh, a bit of a dodgy angle on this. Try not to strip it. Oh, there we go. Yeah, often one of the quickest ways to tell if you seized your piston if you're not sure. Obviously, I know that I seized it because I know the sound, but if you're not sure, that's usually the quickest way to tell that you seized it, because you'll see scratches on the piston, which when I get the piston out in a second, you're going to see those scratches, and it's usually very obvious up through the exhaust port. Good idea to, if you still have it, to disconnect this little. It's like a little secondary air recirculation, like an emissions controller, because a bit easier to disconnect it. It's just split anyway, but a bit easier to disconnect it while the exhaust is still bolted to the scooter, so it's holding the weight. If you've got to pull it off and it's still attached, it can be a bit of a pain. Alright, there's a couple of exhaust mounting bolts. I've already disconnected it from the header. Should come off pretty easy after this. She's still a bit warm, so I'm trying not to burn myself here. Don't force it, just want to wiggle it. There we go. Just proper stuck that one. There we go. So I just got these 4 head studs, a little bit tight. I will just mention, when you're putting this back, these 2 here, so they're longer. The idea of this is they have some spare thread in the top of them, and that is for the shroud bolts to go through. The bolts go through and they go into the end of that thread. So just when you're pulling it off, just keep that in mind that when you put it back together, you need to put those 2 back in that position, otherwise you won't be able to mount your shroud. Oh, this one hasn't been done in a while. Geez, she's tight. There's a bit of corrosion around, I think. Now, one of the things you're going to notice if you're doing this to a Piaggio, no head gasket. Now Piaggios, factory Piaggios do not use a head gasket. So a bit of an unusual, unique thing about the Piaggios, they don't use a head gasket. So you pull it off and you think, oh, where's the head gasket? Well, they don't have one. So it's totally normal for them to not have one. Let's get a look-see at this piston. You can see from here, I've got a beautiful heat seizure on the top, and we've got another seizure on the bottom. Looks like it's either a 3 or a 5-point seizure. But I'm going to get the piston out. It's going to be much easier to have a look because we've got a bunch of scoring inside the cylinder too, so probably have to give it a little hone. Now you can probably see it just here. These are one of the nice, easy to get out circlips. Sorry. It's got this little tag on the inside, so you can get a set of pliers nice and neatly on there, and you can grab it out. Now we just have to get out one side, so this is generally the exhaust side is the easiest side to get out. Got a bit more access, and that's usually the side that you put in too. So I'm going to grab a set of pliers, we're going to pull that circlip out, and I'm going to tap the gudgeon out from the other side, and we're going to get this piston off and we can have a really good look at it. Got my pliers here. Try and do this neatly. The camera's obstructed my view a little bit. Biggest thing here is that the circlip doesn't fall into the crank casing. There we go, and got him out. Look, often what I would do, which I haven't given a very good example of here, is that when you're taking a circlip out or putting it in, just jam a rag up into the crankcase opening here. That way, if the circlip does happen to fly out, which they do have a habit of because they're quite elastic, springing off, it definitely can't go in the crankcase, because maybe it doesn't even go in there. Maybe it just springs off and it lands somewhere else, but you didn't see where it landed, and then you're just going to be sitting there worrying, oh crap, did it go inside the crank casing? And you won't be able to know if you can't find it. So just a bit of peace of mind, a bit of safety, which I haven't done here, is just putting a rag in the cylinder casing there, just a bit of a preventative thing. Now, if you run out of oil on your scooter, sometimes these can be a little bit dry. Now, don't tap it with a hammer. You're just going to potentially damage your crank, cause all sorts of problems for yourself. So just gently work it. There we go. So the small end bearings in here, obviously, just tip the piston out like that, and that way, if it does come out, it doesn't fall into the casing. There we go. Let's have a better look at our piston. So this is the exhaust side of the piston here. See, we've got a couple little seize points, 3 or 4 of them, and then the intake side, the top, have a big seize there. We actually have a little bit of melted piston. Hopefully you can see it there, which I'll show you the cylinder in a minute. There's a bit of corresponding melted piston stuck to the inside of the cylinder. Now the rings here, obviously the rings aren't jammed up, they're not gummed up, which is why the bike restarted, still has compression. So but what can happen in a really bad seize, that molten piston material is overheated and melted, it comes up and it gets stuck inside the ring slots, and it essentially like welds the rings into place, and then you have no compression. So this is more common in like a high performance cylinder, like a 70 kit. I've had this happen to quite a few of my bikes that have run a little bit too close to the edge. Single ring cylinders, it's very common as well, because you just obviously have half the number of rings, so very easy for that one ring to get jammed in. But yeah, that's why this one started back up. Now eventually that would just keep seizing and probably would eventually gum the rings up, then it wouldn't start anymore. But once you've had that one seize, that's it, new piston. So there's no way of avoiding it. Now if this has happened to you, the most important thing with this is you need to work out why the bike seized. Now obviously this one seized because we overheated it deliberately. Now if this wasn't the case, if it was a customer that came in, their bike had seized, pull the piston out, one of the first things we're looking for is how dry is it? Is there a general amount of sort of oiliness around the piston, or is it dry? Now this one, you see, hopefully you can see there's some general oiliness around the inside of the piston. There's general oiliness around the top. Doesn't look really dry. Our little end bearing and our gudgeon pin, they're nice and oily. They're not dry. Just a light film of oil, you know. You're not looking for, you know, to be dripping of oil, but if it's really dry, you should be concerned, because this would indicate probably you've got an oiling issue. Maybe your oil pump has failed, there was an oil leak somewhere, because and that's caused your seizure. Now, if you don't do this and you go ahead and put the bike back together and perhaps you do have an oiling issue, it's just going to seize again straight away. So, you know, you're just going to be up for another piston and doing the whole job again. So that's why it's important to try and work out why it's seized. Now, maybe the bike's old, maybe it's got, you know, 10, 15,000 Ks on it, it's really carboned up. It's going to tell you it's probably just an age-related seizure. The pistons, you know, particularly if you've got a lot of carbon, a lot of oil gumming around the rings and they're sort of stuck in place, they don't really want to move, that's probably just an age-related failure, or maybe you're not using a very high-quality oil. Now, in this case, one of the things that is pretty common on the Piaggios is the rubber on the intake tends to get old and crack. Now, if we hadn't done this deliberately, if this bike had come into the shop and it appeared to be tuned correctly, maybe it was totally stock bike, it has a stock jet in there, there's no obvious reason why it should have nipped up, I would be straight away looking for air leaks around the airbox, because this is a heat seizure, and generally running too lean is what's going to cause a heat seizure. In this case, obviously not. Yeah, so very important to try and work out why you've seized the piston before you go and put it all back together. Now, coming to our cylinder, this is going to be a little bit tricky to show you on the camera, but you'll see just on here, focus, yep, we've got some scratching there, a little bit of melted piston material, and then we have some also, if the camera will focus, maybe it won't, hang on. I've got some melted piston material in there, and also along the right hand side of the port there. So we're going to have to give this cylinder a hone, because we've got melted piston material on the inside of it, and that's just going to encourage the new piston to then melt to that material. So we're going to grab our honing stones, and we're going to give this one a bit of a hone. Okay, got the cylinder here in our parts washer. Now, the aim of this is just to remove that the scratching and the extra piston material that's been left inside the cylinder by the seizure. Now, you don't want to do this dry, so we always use a little bit of Inox, or you can use WD-40, similar product. You could probably even use two-stroke oil if you didn't have any of this. Now, don't use sandpaper, don't use anything like that. The only correct way to do this is with an actual honing tool, honing stones. So we actually sell these on our website, little honing stone kit. But I'm sure you can get them from, from lots of different shops. It's up to you. Now, the thing with this, when I'm doing this, you'll notice I'm not just popping them in there and just spinning the drill, constantly going up and down. Now, the reason for this is what you want here is it's going to leave scratches inside the cylinder, but you want the scratches to be cross-hatched, because that's just the way they're supposed to be. I could go into it, but you want them to be cross-hatched. Now, what cross-hatch means, instead of just little rings inside there, if you were just to put the honing stones in there and hold it, instead of that, the scratches, because they're going up and down, they cross over each other as they're going up. They're spiraling up and down over each other, and as they spiral, they cross-hatch, hence the name cross-hatching. It's going to prevent the piston from wanting to grab the inside of the cylinder and seize again. Just going to sit them in there. Now, you don't need to do this for ages. You're not trying to remove really a lot of material from the inside of the cylinder. You're just trying to give it a nice clean. All right, I'd actually feel when it started to smooth out, the drill started to just get a little bit smoother as I was moving it, and it just means that it's cleaned it up really nice. It's removed all the scratching, it's removed that excess piston material that was left in there from the seizure. you can actually feel it start to smooth up and get be less resistant on the drill as it's spinning. So that's all you need. You don't need to sit here for 20 minutes because you're just going to end up boring the cylinder out further and causing yourself problems. So just trying to clean it up, and that's exactly what we've done. So I'm going to get a little spray of inox and on a quick install. You're still going to get some little marks in there from the seizure, but actually feel it's nice and smooth now. There's no obvious dags or big deep gouges or anything in the cylinder wall. It's nice and clean. Now, if you did have big deep gouges, probably it's time to replace the cylinder. But fortunately on this one, it was just really a pretty light seizure. So I'm going to take this one back over. I'm going to clean the inox off it, clean it up, and we can grab our new piston kit and start putting it together. Cylinder's cleaned up, so we're ready for our piston kit. Brand new Piaggio piston kit here. Now in your kit, you're going to get a couple of rings, if you've got a good kit. Hopefully there's rings in there. Brand new piston, obviously. Usually they'll come with a brand new gudgeon pin as well, and a couple of circlips. Now the great thing about this particular kit is they're the E-type circlips, which gives you a nice little tag on the inside. It's so much easier to get these ones in, honestly. Now, on the subject of circlips, now putting the circlips in while the piston's in the bike is really painful. So you want to make it as easy as you can on yourself. What we usually do, as I mentioned when I was pulling the piston out, the exhaust side on most scooters is the side with the most access to get into that circlip area. So what you want to do, obviously arrow indicates the exhaust port. So this is the correct orientation when the piston's in the bike. Now, because the variator side is the more difficult side to get to, we're going to put our variator side circlip in while we're putting the piston together outside of the bike. That way, when we put the piston in, the only circlip we have to worry about is the exhaust side one. And it's not easy, but it's the easier of the two to get in. We're also going to pop our rings on the piston. And what we usually do is just to make it easy, because the ring pins sit on the top of the piston, and due to limited access, because you have to squeeze the rings to get the cylinder over the top of the piston, it can be a bit of a pain to see where these ring pins are and to line the rings up with the ring pins when you're in the confines of that engine area. So what we usually do is we'll assemble the piston and then slot the piston into the cylinder and then slide the whole assembly down onto the engine studs together. That way the rings are captured, they're in their correct spot. It just makes it so much easier. Again, the more work you can do off the bike, it means less work doing in the confines of that tight little engine space. So it's just going to make it easier on yourself. No reason to make things harder. Now, the other thing is most of the piston kits that we sell, and certainly most that you would buy, don't come with a base gasket. Now, as I mentioned already, the Piaggio 50cc Hopper 2 doesn't use a head gasket, so you don't got to worry about that. But best practice is to put a new base gasket in. Honestly, these are so cheap. This is a genuine Piaggio base gasket. It makes sense to put a new base gasket in there. You've got to remember, with a two-stroke, because your air and your fuel's coming up through the crank casing, though it's low pressure, that crank casing is actually pressurized. Now, on a four-stroke, you can probably get away with not replacing the base gasket because it's really just stopping major air leaks and stopping a bit of fuel escaping out through the base on most four-strokes. But with a two-stroke, because that space between the cylinder and the crank casing, because air and fuel is actually coming through there, it is actually providing a seal, and you can get an air leak through there, which will give you a bit of drama if you're using an old base gasket that isn't sealing properly. So best practice, for the price of, I don't know how much these are, a couple of dollars, just replace the base gasket. Okay, so when we're putting the piston together, it needs to be oiled, not excessively, but just a little bit. So whichever way you want to do it, I'm going to do it the way that I find the most easy. This is the little top cap of the piston kit. So I'm just going to put a little bit of two-stroke in there. I'm going to set that down. So as I'm assembling the piston, I'm just going to dab a little bit of oil around the place, so it's not going in dry. Now, this will be a little bit messy, but that's why I use a little you can use like a bottle cap or a little tray if you want, whatever's easiest for you. I'm going to put a little bit on the rings as well. I'm definitely going to put some on the gudgeon pin. Slippery.
definitely put some on the gudgeon pin. Now before we go ahead and put it in the scooter, I'm just going to test fit this gudgeon, make sure it fits nicely. Yep. I'll put a bit more oil on there and get some in the gudgeon slot on the other side of the piston. Now it's a little bit difficult to get out of the bike, and that's because sometimes these get a little bit dry inside the gudgeon, because the gudgeon's not really moving, so any oil in there just tends to get burned up over time. So if we get a bit of two-stroke oil inside that gudgeon slot before the piston goes in, it's just going to make it easier for us when, again, we're in the confines of the engine there, that engine space. You know, like I said, whatever you can do to make it easier on yourself before you put it into the engine, it's going to make your life a lot easier. Okay, now, one thing I will mention, some pistons, you'll notice that these little ring pins, they're offset in that they're not in the center, they're slightly off. Now, if we look at our actual rings, hopefully you can see it in the camera, you'll see that it actually, the ring slot on the ring matches the offset pin on the piston. It's sort of a difficult thing to explain, but basically the ring needs to go on a particular orientation. It can't go on like that because it's not going to match up the ring, not going to match up with the ring pin. So what we're going to do, you'll see there, see how it matches up properly. I hope you can see. Not all rings are like this, but a lot are. Now these are a nice quality ring, so they're really nice and elastic. They stretch on there really nice and easy. Hopefully you can see that now. Just check, always best practice, check before you go and put it on, because the last thing you want to do is put it on the wrong way and end up snapping a ring when you go to slide it into the cylinder. Okay, so I've got both of our rings on there. Now we're going to chuck this circlip in. Same as I mentioned before, check your arrow, so you're doing it on the right side, or the left side of the scooter, but on the correct side. So arrow points down to the exhaust, which means the circlip we want to put in is on the variator side. It's on this side. Now the idea with putting these circlips in, the idea is to put the least stress on the circlip that you can, but get it in. You don't want to bend it or stretch it, because it'll make it loose, and there's a more likelihood of it slipping out. If it slips out, you're pretty much stuffed. So it's really hard to do in a way that you can see nicely on the camera. But there you go. That one's in. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rotate it a bit, because what I don't want, see the little end of the circlip in there? I don't want that sitting on these little cutouts here. Just more likelihood of it slipping out. So look, that one's sitting in there really nicely. I'm quite happy with that. Always double, triple check that they're sitting in the slot, because sometimes what they can do is they can wedge in there but not actually be in the slot, and then you're going to be in a world of hurt when that circlip slips out while you're riding and has one of those really big complete seizures where the piston just won't move at all, which I mentioned earlier. All right, I think we're just about ready to assemble this. Just find the ring pin. Okay. Now, same as everything else, it's about patience and not forcing stuff with this. Get those rings in a nice spot. Okay. So, again, arrow, exhaust port. So we're going to slot that in. Getting a little bit caught, which can happen. Just be gentle with it, work it in, yep. Just being a little bit stubborn. Okay, I can see what I've done. There we go. There we go, okay. Setting in there. So now I'm pretty much ready to assemble this. So I'm going to slide the whole thing on together, and then we just have to worry about this circlip here. And I can't stress this enough. If it's too hard, if something's not right, stop, have another look, be patient, don't force anything. And a good idea is to make sure you get that base gasket off. I might get that off with the blade, because it's the paper's just ripping up before we go ahead and chuck it in the bike. Now, one important thing I forgot to mention is what you also want to do on top of oiling the piston and the rings. You want to just put a bit of oil on the inside of the cylinder as well. Just because obviously we've cleaned it up. When we've honed it, given it a bit of a clean afterwards, you just want to get some oil back in there. You don't really want anything to be dry. You know, that's the whole key with a two-stroke. You want two-stroke oil Not excessive, but you want it everywhere, so it's nice and lubricated, and it's doing its job.
All right, so first things first, I'm gonna pop our base gasket on. Now, fortunately, this time, the base gasket, it was an old paper one. It did get stuck, but it got stuck to a cylinder, not the crank casing. It's a real pain when they get stuck to the crank casing, but it's pretty easy to clean off when it's on the cylinder. Now, I'm going to do what I didn't do before. I'm going to jam a rag down in here. Hopefully it doesn't obstruct the view. But as I mentioned before, just to try and prevent, if the circlip does fly off, just to try and prevent it from going into the crank casing, because if that happens, yeah, we're in big trouble. So I might just reposition that actually, so it doesn't block the shot. All right. Now these have very commonly they're a real pain to get in, this little circlip. So hopefully it's not too bad. Now, as I mentioned, the little end bearing in this one was a little bit whizzy. I've inspected it and the condition's not too bad. We're probably going to be putting a 70 kit or something like that in this bike soon anyway. So I'm not going to bother replacing it because it probably won't be in there for long. It's not like it's about to fall apart. It is just a little bit noisy. But if this was my bike and I was planning on riding it around for a bit, I'd probably replace that. Okay, so that little end bearing as well, I did oil that before I put it in. Okay, so we're going to slide that on. Now the key here, it's a bit difficult for me because it's obstructed by the camera, but the key here is to slide the cylinder down far enough that it lines up with the eye of the crank, and then we can slide this gudgeon pin in. Just kind of wiggle it until hopefully it just goes in. That looks about right. Just go in you. All right, there we go. Okay, that's all the way through, I think. Yep. Okay, so now we've got our little end bearing in, we've got our gudgeon in. We're pretty much ready now just to pop this circlip in. Just repositioned it, so hopefully it makes it a little bit easier. Oh, look at that. That one just went in so easy. And in she is. Now, same as before, I'm just going to rotate the end of it around a little bit, if it'll let me. Just so the ends of the circlip, here and here, they're not sitting inside that little slot there. Less likelihood of them wanting to slip out. But I actually felt that one click in. It definitely went in nice. What I would always recommend is just get a little flat blade in there and just give it a little push just around, just to make sure that it's definitely sitting nicely in the slot. But I'm very confident that that one is, as I felt it snap in. Because yeah, sometimes they can just jam, they can just sit on the edge of the lip and not go all the way in. There's been a couple of times I've done that, I've given it a push and it's made a little click and it's popped in actually into that little recess in there properly. But this one's definitely in. I'm very confident that one's good. Go ahead and pull this off. And because we set it all up nicely at the start, there we go. Just push it down and off we go. I'm just going to give the head a little wipe just around the area. The top of the cylinder a little wipe just to make sure there's no dirt or anything like that that's picked up. Now with these Piaggio heads, they are offset and the cylinder is as well. So just make sure that it goes on the right way. Now remember, with the Piaggio cylinders, the factory ones is obviously no head gasket, so there's no need to worry about that. And same as I mentioned when we took the cylinder off, these ones have these two longer nuts on the top of the head for the shroud to bolt into. So let's just make sure you put those in the right spot. Probably go ahead and use the ratchet for those two. With our engine parts like this, definitely hand tools. You know, there's just absolutely no need to use electric tools on this sort of stuff, because if you cross thread one of these, it's going to be a real pain. Okay, now with this is an important part. Same as when you do, like say, the wheel nuts on a car, you're going to do a cross pattern. to spread the load evenly. And the big thing with this is because the studs are going into the aluminium casing of the engine, it doesn't need to be crazy tight. You go ahead and make it crazy tight, you're going to damage the threads and rip those studs out of the engine and have a whole new problem on your hands. So they just need to be firm, not tight. And I mentioned as well, I'm just using a little quarter drive ratchet. That way it's quite short and I can't really get a huge amount of leverage on it, which is deliberate. I don't want it to be crazy tight. So I'm just going to use that cross pattern. I'm just going to slowly do them up. That one feels pretty good now. That one feels good. Firm, but not tight. Yep. That's good. Just double check them. Yep. Okay, very happy with all of those. Very happy with how that's gone together. Now, what I'd normally do at this point, normally recommend doing, just use the fan and just rotate the engine a couple of times. Now, look, it's very unlikely that this would be the case, but if for some reason you had done something wrong, you'd forgotten to put the base gasket in maybe, or maybe you got the wrong piston somehow, it should be very obvious at this point. Now, if you're rotating the crank and suddenly it stops and it won't move, then that's a very good indication that you've done something wrong. Now that's not the case here. This is moving really nice and freely. I can actually hear the compression. I can feel it. You feel it? Yeah, there it is. So we've done the job right. It's got compression. It's rotating nice and freely, and it doesn't have a scratching or a dragging noise about it. So no big jolting sudden stops or anything like that. We've done a good job of it. So I think pretty much now all we need to do is go ahead and chuck the shroud back on, put the fan cover back on. I'm going to chuck a brand new spark plug in this. It's usually a good idea. If you've what you probably can do, depending on why yours seized, is that you can go ahead and put the old spark plug in just to start it up, because when we've assembled it, we've put a lot more oil in there than would normally be present. So what can happen is it can just gum the plug up a tiny bit, just on the first couple of starts in the first run. That oil will burn through pretty quickly, but if you've maybe been a little bit too heavy on the oil, you might go ahead and gum up a brand new plug. So I'm pretty confident that I've put the correct amount of oil in there, so I'm going to put a brand new plug. But maybe if it's your first time, you've not done it before, and you're not completely positive, maybe you've over-oiled it, not a terrible idea to put the old plug in there and use that for the first couple of runs, and then go and chuck a new plug in after that, once that excess oil has burned out. Now maybe you haven't rebuilt a scooter engine before, maybe you've only done it once or twice. In that case, I'd probably recommend at this point that you go ahead and chuck a spark plug in there, connect it up, and just start the bike up for its first start, even without the exhaust on, just to make sure that everything's being done properly and it is running. Because if for some reason you got to connect everything back up, you put the bike all back together and it doesn't start, you're going to have to pull everything back apart again, because it is quite easy to inadvertently, accidentally create a problem that'll stop it from running. Look, I'm very confident this is probably, I don't know, the 15th or 20th or something Zip I've rebuilt. So I'm going to go ahead and chuck all the panels and everything that I've unnecessarily pulled off for the video. I'm going to put everything back together, and then we'll get it outside for its first start. I've got her all back together. So I'm going to take her outside and see if she starts. Hopefully she does. And look, I haven't actually even trial started this one off camera. This will literally be the first start. So hopefully it doesn't embarrass me. Started after a rebuild, purely just because it needs to refuel up. But that one started pretty much straight away. She's idling and running nicely, so it's a job well done. Hopefully that was useful for you guys. Thanks for watching. Look, we're going to try and do some more demonstrational videos with this little black Zip. It's a shop scooter, so we've got a bit planned for it. So if that's what you want to see, definitely like and subscribe. Hang around. We're going to be uploading some more videos. But again, guys, thanks very much for watching. Thanks for your support. And as always, if you have any questions at all, please let us know in the comments. We endeavour to answer every single question.